Ales coming right up. Hello, and welcome to the BRB. Please, have a seat. You're just in time for Tavern chatter.
Here's a special edition of...
Everything's a special
Yeah,
edition.
no, we only have like 12 episodes, bud.
Fucking...
We're doing something a little different this
We're
time.
doing something a little different.
It's more of like D&D has such a huge cult following, and everyone has been introduced to it by famous people like Critical Role. But some of us veteran players, we were actually introduced in a subtle way, and we were all curious on how everyone was introduced.
Speak for yourself. I was introduced by someone famous.
Mine wasn't subtle. It was like an explosion. They were just like, D&D! And I was there.
You're just the big bang, the D&D bang,
Yeah.
the B&D.
So the question for the crew today is just, what was your introduction to Dungeons & Dragons or role-playing tabletop games?
There, we got it. Perfect.
No, I was asking you a question podcast-wise.
This is why Brian
we
does
got
the
it.
opening.
I was having banter with you.
If you can't tell, it wasn't banter.
So Beck, how were you introduced to D&D?
I played Dungeon Crawl Classics. I rolled a D24 and a D17. My health was a D16. Yep,
Those are certainly dice.
it was great.
What shape are those dice?
Round.
Non-Euclidean.
Look, I played older editions. That just sounds like nonsense to
It
me.
is.
How did you come across that?
Random posting in a game store.
So you went to a game store and like actually played with a group?
Yeah, it was just an app meetup. Me and my brother signed up for it and we're like, hey, drove down to Westminster, signed up for a game.
That's amazing. How old were you?
Like, 19?
That's fantastic.
Yeah, this guy and I, the best way to like get by in our small town was to go camping.
That's
Well,
lame.
we're from a hick town, so
Yeah.
like, you know, there's,
Fucking hicks.
we're not. Yeah, we didn't get fun.
We were
I lived
actually
20 minutes outside of Denver growing up, so
That's incredible. That's
a
so
good time.
cool.
That's why my brother still helps run Genghis Khan whenever he's in the States. Because the guy we used to play with runs Genghis Khan now.
So that was how you're introduced. Did you just like slowly make your way up playing other editions, or did you jump into the newer editions?
From there, we played 3.5, a bit of 4, jumping around to a bunch of different systems. We actually play tested 5th edition, too.
God damn, that's fantastic.
Monks were broken back then, too. At
Monks
level 1, it was crazy.
How were you introduced, Josh?
I was actually introduced to Pathfinder before I was introduced to Dungeons & Dragons. I worked at City Market in our tiny little hick town, and one of my coworkers, he was an older gentleman. He kind of went around to a couple of us and was just like, I want to start playing Pathfinder. I haven't had a group in a while. Who would be interested? And I'd heard things about it. I'd never like done anything. I've never watched anything about it. And I was like, oh, that sounds silly, but I like silly. And I played with a group, one chick from our pharmacy. I played the edgiest character I could think of because, you know.
That tracks.
Yeah. And we had a guy who played a gnome, or he had played Pathfinder before. He played like a gnome, the alchemist. From there, I was hooked. Literally, I think it was like the first week's couple sessions. I ended up just being all about this game. I then made my way down here to where we live now, met up with Brant and Beck, and that's what brought me into 5e. And then while playing 5e and while we kind of stopped playing D&D for a little bit, I played a couple online games in 3.5 and 4th edition. Mine's fairly recent. I think I started playing also when I was 19, actually.
The more recent one was with starting up in 5e with Minds of Fandelver. Got together my 2 roommates as well as Brian, Andy, and our other friend Jess, and we got a little group going to try out Minds of Fandelver. It was all of our first times with 5e, and most of us for the first time playing a tabletop role-playing game.
But before that, for Christmas one year, we ended up getting the starter set for 3.5. I was like 8 years old. Eric was like 6.
Yeah.
Maybe a year before that, but we were young. And so here we are, 6 and 8 year old kids trying to learn 3.5, at least back then, I felt like a very complicated system. And so we started out with, it was a kobold trapped dungeon. God, it was rough. It was us, our stepfather was our DM, and then our mother was also playing. But because there were just the three of us, we were also discussing trying to play two characters at the same time each, and that was also rough. So we kind of played it for 3 or 4 sessions and then just kind of dropped it and hadn't touched it until more recently when I started up a 5e campaign. So
That's so wholesome.
it was kind of a neat little, you know what, let's try it and see how it goes.
That's so wholesome. You just did D&D with the family.
Yeah, it was a little bit rough to try to teach our mother, who's not all that nerdy and game mindset, and then the two of us being very young. So we ended up dropping it. I still have the books, all except for the Dungeon Master Guide, which I don't know where that went. How did you get started with tabletop games, Brant?
Ooh, tabletop role-playing games?
Yeah.
The time I was formally introduced was probably after 4 one-shots, I would say. It was a very weird experience on being introduced to tabletop games, which I'm surprised that I actually
Stuck with it.
Yeah, how I got stuck with it. It was crazy. So the first time, I don't know how I encountered the person, but he was constantly high all the time.
Oh, you're talking about Lionhead Eric?
Yeah.
No.
He...
Not our Eric.
But
He's a normal head.
He was the quintessential stoner from a movie. But he found me and he's like, "Hey, I know a game called D&D. Do you want to join me on it?" And I'm like, "Sure." I was new to college and I had no idea who to hang out with at the time, so that's where I went.
Can I ask you a question? Did he just approach you on the street?
Yeah, that is how Lionhead
That's
Eric
kind of
was.
how he went.
Did you know this guy?
No.
No, you just went to a guy's house to play D&D?
It wasn't a house. This was college. This was
You went to his
dormitory.
dorm.
Yeah.
You had
That's how
no
college
idea who
works,
this guy
right?
was?
No idea.
God, you were lucky you were a tall man. I'm just saying, this would be a weirder situation if Brant was a chick.
Or a short dude?
Well, yeah. Look, we gotta fight. We gotta
Dude,
scrap.
Lionhead Eric is shorter than me.
Oh, okay.
But it only got as far as, I believe, character creation.
Yeah.
It was the common question of, wait, you can be anyone you want to be during this game. It's like, yes, you can. And I just thought that idea was really cool, but never followed through with that. And then I was then introduced to D&D again by another Eric. And his name was Baldhead Eric, just to distinguish the two. But
We knew a lot of Erics.
Eric's like D&D.
So
Can confirm.
just to Lionhead,
he had a mane.
okay,
Okay.
full fucking beard.
Bald Eric. And then other Erics.
See, I was just picturing a guy with a literal lion's head.
That's. I was thinking that sounds badass.
No, he just had one hell of a mane.
Okay.
But got introduced to D&D again by another Eric. And during that time, the story didn't work out as well. It was more of a narration than anything.
Yeah.
And rolls didn't necessarily determine much unless you rolled a nat 20. Then
Then you explode an entire mine.
then you destroy an entire dungeon that was filled with spiderwebs because of one fire spell.
So a chaos DM.
And then he found you.
He
It wasn't necessarily chaos. It was more like he occasionally allowed us to roll dice while he told a story. And occasionally those dice interfered with his story in a way that he did not appreciate.
well, another thing was he liked a particular someone in our group, and the narration favored said person. That was funny. But that was the next time I was introduced to D&D, and then I was introduced to D&D the third time, and this time it was a very chaotic session, and this went from full narration to a roll determines whatever the hell happened. That's how I became the god of doors.
This is the fabled Shadowrun game?
No. That's
No.
a different one.
Now, was this third time another Eric, or was this
This
someone?
one was
No.
a Josh.
Hold on.
Third
There's going
Josh.
to be a loud sound because Eric and I are going to clap. Or gonna high five.
But that one, character creation was quick. And then right after that, went straight into the game, and I think I was introduced about a couple days in. They already started the game. And then, I don't know why, but I had this weird idea to do some particular thing that... Oh, it was a wish spell. Oh my god, it was a wish
You
spell.
have such a
Never
history with
get
wish
Brant the
spells.
wish spell.
Yeah. So, I got the wish spell, and I was like, I want to be the god of doors.
And you were.
And thank goodness this DM, he was like way into the rule of cool, and I was able to transport myself across the world by launching myself doors.
Wow.
I think this is where my fear of the deck of many things comes in.
Probably.
Why?
Did you not hear the last story?
And the fourth time I was properly introduced to a tabletop role-playing game. That was the fabled Shadowrun game.
Yeah, with Chris, you know the DM.
Yeah, Chris, the DM.
So a different Chris.
Yep.
Yeah.
God damn.
There are 4 people that play D&D. Josh, Eric, and Chris.
We're all
Everyone
the
else is an
DMs.
outlier.
We're all the DMs.
And I don't know how, but during those other older sessions, I still stuck to it. It was an experience.
So I think the people that play D&D are Eric's, Josh's, Chris's, and the people whose names start with B.
Yeah.
That's true. You're the
And
outlier.
then Andy's the outlier.
No, it's Bandy.
We've just been pronouncing it wrong this whole time.
There's a silent B at the
Be
beginning.
a silent.
So, Andy, what was your introduction to Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop roleplay?
So, my introduction to tabletop role playing was actually pretty early on. I wasn't a player, but my dad was pretty avid about it. So I got to hear a lot of what he was doing with his groups online and stuff. They eventually gave up the tabletop shit and just went straight into role playing. And he would spend hours out in the patio just typing on his laptop. And the entire time he was just writing stories with these other dudes online. And I'd hear about it. Every so often he'd get drunk and sit me down and, okay, this is what's happening.
So your dad was a part of like the original
Yeah.
like one paper, everybody just like types to each other comments.
It was more like a forum type thing,
Dude,
but yeah.
I've heard of those.
Yeah, he spent most of his time off work doing that. My first time actually playing a TTRPG was probably the game with Eric. I think I was also 19.
It's the right age.
It's either 19 or 8, apparently.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
You would have been older than 19 because I think I was 19 at the time.
Yeah, no, you were at least 21 because there were several times that that you ended up coming over and drinking.
I mean, that doesn't. We shouldn't advocate for people drinking at a younger age.
We don't know what we're drinking. It was apple juice.
Yeah, it was all apple juice.
It's apple juice that tasted
Look,
better.
We run a tavern.
But yeah, the first time was in Eric's game. I think I played just the pre-built Dragonborn. Was it Dragonborn Paladin or Dragonborn Cleric?
Paladin.
Paladin. Didn't really know much of what I was doing. Later on, I'd realized that I'd been practicing for D&D my entire life because the early Fire Emblem games are very D&D-esque.
All right, it's closing time. Feel free to stay out in the stables. If you like what we had to talk about, hit that like button. If you want to see what we have in store next, hit that subscribe button as well. Check out our social media in the description below for more of our content. Have any suggestions? Leave it in a comment below.